This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content. Let's talk about it, right? A lot of people are concerned, and I think rightfully so concerned, about Myles Garrett being unhappy. Now, this is for a number of reasons. Some of these reasons are directly related to Myles Garrett's situation in Cleveland, right? Myles is not happy not winning. Myles is not happy with how this season has went down. He has expressed that he wants to stay with the organization long term, but he also has desires that he wants met as a player in his career. So a lot of people concerned, right? Whenever you hear an athlete might want out in Cleveland, you know, the national media runs with it. A lot of people run with it. Our imaginations run wild. And now all of a sudden we're doing, is Myles Garrett going to get traded to New York? Are the Browns going to trade Myles Garrett if he requests a trade? Is Myles going to request a trade to be moved? Now, the Browns' history on trade request is pretty solid when it comes to this, right? If a player requests a trade in the last 4 years, that means nothing. So I don't think Myles is going to request a trade anytime soon. And I don't think even if he does, the Browns are going to try to allow cooler heads to prevail. So overall, the first message I want to give on this is don't panic, right? Like, Myles is just expressing some things over the long-term future of this team, but I don't think this is like, oh, Myles is going to request a trade if you don't do the thing that he wants at quarterback. I don't think he's holding the team hostage or anything like that or trying to enforce his will on the team. I think he's just frustrated with how this season has gone, like a lot of guys, but he understands the business and everything else of what needs to happen for this team to get better. And I think there are three main things that Myles Garrett wants that would keep Myles Garrett happy, right? So if you boil down what he wants into three things. One, he wants to be competitive. He said this himself. He wants to play meaningful football in the month of January. He wants to do more of what they did last year, more of what they did in 2020, less of what they've done in 2019 and 2018 and 2017 and on, right? And even in 2022 and obviously 2024. Another thing that Myles Garrett wants is help, right? I think they've left him out there on the island sometimes. And he also wants to feel like he has a role in this organization's future. This is a guy who owns part of the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? So he wants voice or standing in whatever organization he's a part of. So how do you accomplish these three things with Myles Garrett? Let's start with competitive, meaningful football, right? First, let's unpack that term and talk about what that means. Does it mean that the Browns have to be a Super Bowl contender to keep Myles? No. That means that the Browns have to be a good team, though, to keep Myles. They have to prove that years like this are aberrations and not the norm for the franchise. They have to prove that they're not going to dip as low as this and that this is a special circumstance, right? If you ask Browns fans, the one argument for the season is, hey, it got tanked by Deshaun Watson. Now, there are other problems on the team than Deshaun Watson. Nobody's ignoring that. But if you ask a lot of people what the issue with the win-loss record is and why the Browns are so uncompetitive this year, it goes with Deshaun Watson horribly underperforming expectations. Now, if that's where they're sitting and they know that's the case, that's going to affect how Myles feels about certain plans at the quarterback position. Like if the Browns' plan was to bring back Deshaun, which I don't think is the case, right? I don't think they're that tone deaf that they would have been like, no, we're going to bring back Deshaun for another year. But let's say the Browns' plan was to bring back Deshaun for another year. I think that would be something that Myles Garrett would be rightfully kind of annoyed with. And he would go into the season annoyed with that idea. And then the season would go out. And if it doesn't play out well, he's going to be annoyed with that too. And that's going to factor into how long of an extension he's going to want, right? You got to build your trust with him, and you got to build some kind of trust between the organization and Myles Garrett that the Browns can play meaningful football in the month of January. Then there's the second thing, right, that Myles wants. Help. He wants help. Now, we always focus on help when it comes to a player on a specific side of a ball, right? If we're talking about Myles Garrett and we talk about what's help for Myles Garrett, we're always going to focus in on other pieces on the defense. Now, I think Myles has some good pieces on that defense. You're going to get JOK back, hopefully. You got Denzel Ward as a co-running mate there, right? Two of the best players at their division with Myles Garrett. I don't think you're lacking a ton of help on defense, but you could certainly add to it by getting somebody like an Abdul Carter or something like that in the draft, Mason Graham, to kind of add to what you already have with Myles Garrett. So there's that, right? You can help him on defense. And I always argue that help on defense and making your defense really good is a good way to make sure you can get away with less at the quarterback positions. If you look at the teams that's gotten away with less at the quarterback position, look at the defenses they have. You never see a mediocre quarterback having a good year with a team with a bad defense. Like, if that has happened, let me know, but I think it's barely happened if it's ever happened. Usually you can get away with some mediocre quarterback play with a good defense. Why? Because defense gives you a huge margin of error. You can turn the ball over. It doesn't matter if you got a great defense. You can go 3 and out, and it doesn't matter. You got a great defense, right? It gives you a large margin of error for quarterback play when you have a great defense behind you. So if the Browns want to get better quarterback play or get away with what they can get at quarterback, obviously stacking on defense, relying on your 2 franchise players in Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward, and getting that thing done that way is an option. But much like how we overlook how much help on defense is a huge help for offense, we overlook how much help on defense will help on offense is helpful to the defense, right? What Myles Garrett is probably tired of, like, I'm just taking a random guess out here, right? A stab in the dark. I bet one of the things he's tired of is being in charge of a defense that has to go on the field so often because the offense can't get anything going. And then when the defense does not have success when put in an impossible situation, they blame him, right? A lot of this stuff is about legacy, right? Myles Garrett is a talented enough player to be worried about his legacy, or be worried about how he's seen, and to be worried about how he'll get into Canton, because he's a first ballot Hall of Famer for sure, but he wants to not just be known as Myles Garrett, first ballot Hall of Famer, right? We talk about how does he separate himself from TJ Watt when both of these guys are first ballot Hall of Famers. Well, if Myles Garrett has more success on the field, is the anchor of some top 10 defenses, then that changes how we view him. We, instead of saying Myles Garrett, first ballot Hall of Famer, we say Myles Garrett, one of the greatest of all time. Myles Garrett, the Randy Moss of edge rushers, right? We start putting him into context that I think he can get to as far as his potential as a player. And one of the things holding him back, and that's been consistently holding him back in his time as a Cleveland Brown, is the fact that the offense for the Cleveland Browns has not been consistent. There have been a lot of years where I'm talking about the Browns after the game, and I got to throw this sentence out here. What is the sentence? Well, the offense kept giving the ball back to the defense. The offense kept giving the ball back to the other team. The offense kept putting the defense in a tough spot. And then the defense broke. But when you look at the end score, nobody cares about how it happened. They just look at it and go, oh, the Browns gave up over 20 points. We did a whole video about this, about how the Browns defense kind of got blamed for having to deal with the excessive amount of turnovers that the offense got at the end of 2023. And we're all talking about the road defense, right? That kind of stuff has to slow down. Now, if you're the Browns, how do you build an offense that keeps the defense off the field, without being sure that there's a franchise quarterback in your future? 3 words for you. Y'all want to guess the 3 words that I have right here? Y'all want to guess the 3 words that I'm about to say? Hope you can see it. Run the ball. That is how you do it. Now, you don't just like blindly run 400 times and call it a day and say that that's running the ball. But what I did see when they had DTR out there was, I think, insight to why DTR was out there in the first place, right? Because if you watch that game, a lot of people came away with the thought process of, well, with the thought of, hey, why was DTR out there? He clearly isn't better than Jameis Winston. He's not executing the offense at the same level as Jameis Winston. So why did the Browns have him out there? Was it just to purposely lose this game? And I think that's a conclusion a lot of people have come to. I've come to a slightly different conclusion. I don't think DTR was put out there because they truly wanted to see what they have in DTR. I think that was a side effect of the real reason they put him out there, but I don't think that's why they did. I don't think they put DTR out there because they felt like they wanted to lose this game. I think that's a side effect, but it wasn't really the intended reason for putting him out there. I think the Browns went into this game fully intent on winning it. I think they put DTR out there so they can run more of the RPO stuff in this offense. Like, that's why he was in there. If you look at the stuff that DTR actually had success in this game, it was all that RPO stuff. If you look at what the Browns have been wanting to add to this offense ever since they got Deshaun Watson in, is a lot of that RPO stuff. Like, I think Kevin has a bit of a love affair with that RPO stuff. He's been trying to add it in. That's one of the things Ken Dorsey was really good at building in Buffalo, was all that RPO stuff. But what do Deshaun Watson and Jameis Winston have in common? They're both terrible at RPO stuff. And now that Jameis Winston is throwing 1 million interceptions, I think they looked at it and say, hey, let's see what this RPO stuff looks like. And if we're going to run the RPO stuff, we got to run somebody who actually has the skill set to do it. Let's put in DTR. I think that's why DTR was in there. And when I watched that RPO stuff, I saw a lot of stuff that was working. This game, right, where they broke out all the RPO stuff, was the most successful, most consistent the Browns' run game has looked all season. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. I think statistically that was the case. I think aesthetically that was the case. This was the best the Browns' run game had looked all season. It also happened to be the game where they broke out a ton of the RPO and the design quarterback run stuff, and it was actually successful, right? We go to the box score in this one, and Jerome Ford had, 92 yards on 11 carries, 8.4 yards per carry. Now, he had like a giant run to start the game. But Dorian Thompson-Robinson, 9 carries, 49 yards, 5.4. And they did some of these design runs. The one drive they got against the Bengals, which I thought up until DTR threw an interception was their nicest drive of the game, was a drive where they went heavy with the RPO, heavy with DTR running the ball. And it made me wonder, maybe that's what they're looking for in their next quarterback. Maybe they want somebody who can be comfortable running the football if they understand that they can't get a franchise guy at the position. They're like, okay, the best way to play low-yield quarterback play is to get somebody who can rely on their ability to run, because they're not going to turn the ball over. You're still going to have a productive offense. So you look at Justin Fields, who certainly has that RPO skill set, is somebody you can go to. If the draft, right, you start looking at guys like Riley Leonard, who has an RPO skill set for sure. Some people have brought up Will Howard. I'm not completely sold on that one, but Will Howard is a name you could throw out there. And then Jalen Milroe's probably the top RPO quarterback guy. I don't think Shador does a ton of RPO stuff out there with Pat Shurmur, right? But it feels like the RPO stuff is part of what the Browns want to incorporate in the future of the Browns quarterback play. Now, DTR, he has the skill set to run it, but just look at DTR and look at the size of that defensive end. He ain't got the build to do that, right? He's not going to live if he keeps running the ball 9 times a game, keeps taking these hits. And like, it's not just that DTR is super skinny and not really the most bulky build. That's one thing. He also like has the propensity to take the worst hits possible. Like he launches himself into these defenders in a way that's just not productive for being healthy. So that's how I think the Browns are going to try to stabilize the offense, right? They're going to see what their options are at quarterback. If they feel like somebody is available that they could run a solid traditional offense with, I think they'll go with that. But if they don't see those options there, I think they're willing to get creative. And I think the way they'll get creative is, hey, let's get somebody in there who can run, who can scoot a little bit, right? I think Justin Fields would be there and would make a ton of sense for them. But I think that's going to be a huge part of what they want to do. Now let's get to this third thing that Myles Garrett wants. VIP. He is the franchise player of this team. And I think part of what he was saying is that he's going to use his privilege as the franchise player of this team, right? Joe Thomas famously never used the privilege of being the franchise player of the team to kind of like get things to happen in the right direction. And like, that's not a negative thing on Joe, but that's just something Joe didn't do. Myles wants to use that privilege. He wants his voice to matter in the decisions the Cleveland Browns make going forward. This is somebody who has made moves in sports that would signal that he cares about that, right? He always talks about that. And he also owns part of the Cavs. Right? He's interested in sports ownership. All of that signals to me that Myles Garrett wants his voice to be heard in the Browns room when they're making decisions, when they're doing that. Now, that doesn't mean that the organization hears Myles Garrett and does what Myles Garrett says without question. That just means that you make sure that Myles Garrett is heard, that you make sure that you go out of your way to bring stuff up to Myles that might affect him, that might affect the quarterback position, right? Like, that's what you got to do. You got to placate your franchise player. You got to make him feel involved. And then, like, if it makes sense to involve him in a decision or to take his input, go ahead and take his input, right? That's part of having a franchise player. I know it's been a long time since the Browns have had a true franchise player, but that's part of it, right? When you have a guy who's so good, his number is synonymous with your football team, you have to placate your franchise player. It's nothing new. And he's going to want things to be done that makes him feel like some of these issues that he's having are going to be addressed. And if you're the Browns, you have to do a good job of making the argument that the moves you are making are going to make this team better sooner than later. Because you can't lose a generational talent like Myles Garrett. I heard people already jump to the let's just trade him for 3 first-round picks take. That's a horrible idea. Myles Garrett is worth so much more than 3 first-round picks. You can get 3 first-round picks and not find somebody who's going to be as productive as Myles Garrett. You want to build around dudes like Myles Garrett. You want dudes like Myles Garrett to retire for your football team and be there forever and be stewards for your franchise. You don't want to see Myles Garrett have his best days with somebody else and then retires like a Seahawk or something like that. That just disgusts me. You want to keep guys like that. You want to keep them around. And part of keeping guys like that around is making them understand that they're part of this too. They're not just employees. They're not just here to collect a check. Myles Garrett is a vital part to this organization. He's a vital part to any free agent's appeal to this organization. He's a vital part to any draft pick's appeal to this organization. He's a huge part of this. You got to have him feel involved. You got to have him feeling like his input matters. And that is one of the most important things. So if you're the Browns and you want to make sure that Myles Garrett's happy, it's pretty simple. You got to get to competitive football sooner than later, which, look, I think they're in lockstep about that. I don't think the Browns are going into next season thinking that they're just going to, like, tank and try to get Arch Manning or something like that. I think they're going into next season with the hope to be a playoff team. You know, They're not like, it's kind of like how Pittsburgh never rebuilds, right? We thought Pittsburgh was rebuilding this year with Russ and Justin Fields and all of that. And now they came in with the intention to make the playoffs. And now they're going to make the playoffs. Same is true for the Browns. They're not trying to rebuild for the next 2 years and shut it all down and strip all the parts. They didn't make any of those moves during the trade deadline that would signal that, right? They didn't even get rid of Juan Thornhill. They didn't get rid of Dalvin Thompson. The only people they got rid of were 2 guys on expiring deals. So they're not about to strip this whole team down for parts and give up. They're going to try to make the playoffs next year. So I think Myles and the franchise, they're in lockstep with that one. When it comes to help, I think help on defense is on the way. The Browns get the number 1 overall pick. I mean, not the number 1 overall pick, but if the Browns get like a top 5 pick, they can get Abdul Carter, who would be tremendous help. They can get Mason Graham, who would be tremendous help. And they can get Ashton Genty, who could be tremendous help, right? Like they're going to have options there to make something that affects Myles Garrett closely much better. Now, on the offensive side of the ball is where they have the most work to do. They got to get a solution at tackle because Jed Wills is not the answer. Jermaine Ifedi isn't. And DeJuan Jones has to lose weight and come back from a broken tibia. It's going to be really tough for DeJuan Jones, right? Jack Conklin has injury history, so you're worried about him at right tackle. Like right now, you got to operate if you're the Browns like you ain't got no tackles. And this is not a great offseason to need 2 tackle positions. So how are you going to operate that? That's going to be a tough one for Andrew Berry to figure out. But that's going to be on the top of his list. You got to get some running backs, right? Nick Chubb, you probably bring him back, but who else do you add to that room? Do you keep Jerome Ford? Do you move on from Jerome Ford? Got to answer that question. Wide receiver, you feel fine. Tight end, you can add a name or 2, but it's not that big of a deal if you don't. And then quarterback. What direction you want to go, right? Like, I think that's going to be a big thing. I think we talked about it earlier when we were talking about how the Browns' mindset at quarterback might change based on the things that they want to add to evolve this offense. They're going to do some play action, which we saw Justin Fields do. They're going to do some RPO, which we've seen Justin Fields do. And same thing is true for some of the other options in the draft, right? So that's going to be something that they look at. I wouldn't exclusively look at the quarterback position for the Cleveland Browns this year and assume that you're just going to run the old school Shanahan style offense. I think they want to do some RPO. I think they want to move the ball down the field. I think they want to add some new things to this offense because before we had the whole Watson tanking the offense conversation, there were still issues with this offense feeling a little bit stale. So they need to add to it. They need to evolve it. I said that at the end of last year. I still think that's the case. And seeing them add RPO wrinkles, get the ball down the field, I think that's going to be something that they continue to consider going forward. And then lastly, you need to make sure that he feels like the franchise player that he is, right? You need to include him on stuff. You need to make him feel like his voice matters. And also, like, part of Myles, like, going to the media about this tells me that there's been a failure in just making sure that that's the case, because that can't be the case. Like, if Myles has something to say, if Myles has a gripe, you got to make him feel heard internally so he doesn't feel the need to go out there to the media and make his point at a press conference, right? You got to be available for him, and you got to make sure that you cater to him a little bit because he's a franchise player. But that's what you have to do if you want to keep Myles Garrett happy.